Do you want to live a more fulfilled life and your days are going by and you're trying to do all the things to improve your health, but you feel like something is missing and it might be a sense of purpose or just that feeling of contentment from living a fulfilled and impactful life? If this is you, definitely tune in to this Wild Wisdom show. We're going to be going deep into this and more with my very special guest. I cannot wait to introduce you to her. My name is Dr. Patricia Mills. I'm a holistic medical doctor with a root cause approach to health, and I'm here with Dr. Sabina Nagpal. She's a psychiatrist, not your typical psychiatrist, so I'm really excited to get into this with her. She's a mother of 3 thriving kids, a resilience expert. We all need that in our lives these days, a women's mental health specialist, and the founder of Radiate, the Women's Fulfillment Program. Now, if you are a man and you're watching this and you want to experience fulfillment in your life, this is for you as well. And we need to acknowledge that women have unique challenges in today's living, in our environment, in our modern culture that we need to specifically address. So this is for you if you're a woman, and if you're a man with women in your life, this is very important. So welcome, Dr. Sabina. It is so exciting to have you here. And today we're going to be talking about how to bridge the gap between achievement, resilience, and fulfillment for a more impactful life. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thanks for having me, Patricia. It's so exciting to be here and chatting with you.
Oh, likewise. And we were introduced by a mutual friend, and I love how the universe works to bring the right people into your life at the right time. So I appreciate you being here as well. And when we were talking about, we were talking about your story, and we're going to get into how you got into this because I find that fascinating. You mentioned something to me that really caught my attention, which is how to the importance of learning to identify our blind spots in our life, the blind spots in our life that are holding us back. So, and oftentimes you mentioned, and I agree with you, that requires an outside perspective, like an outsider who has experience guiding you along this. And this is where you come in. You're going to be our expert, guiding us along the method of identifying your own blind spots. And once you do identify them, what to do about them. And there's also this kind of like higher level of awareness of the fact that just acknowledging that every single human on this planet has blind spots when it comes to themselves, right? Like I know I probably have so many blind spots. And I also recognize that were I able to identify these blind spots and then be given the tools to fix them and overcome them and improve on them, my day-to-day living would be probably so much better. So what do you think about that?
I agree, Patricia. And the first thing I want to say is, I agree with you. We all have blind spots, including me. And when I lead and when I coach and when I help women to find more fulfillment in their lives, the first thing I say is that there's no perfect course, and I'm not on it either. I've just committed to my path to fulfillment, right? So I'm on it. And while I stumble and we all stumble and fall, as a community, we come together and we stay committed to this path to fulfillment. So I think one of the things we learn from the beginning is that humility and to kind of let go of some of that kind of perfectionism around this path, right? So me too, stumbling all the time. I'm with you.
All right, let's stumble together along
Yes.
this path. I'm really excited because maybe what we can talk about then, and you decide how you want to take this or what direction you want to go. We could talk about the model that you use for helping people achieve, fulfillment.
Mhm.
Did you want to talk about that first? How would you like to do this?
What I usually try to explain a little bit is kind of like I'll tell my story later, but I just want to start with, if it's okay, some of the observations I had and what kind of brought about this idea to have this model, which is in my clinical work. So this is my story aside, but just what I see, having worked as a women's mental health expert for many years. What I saw was a common pattern, and I think maybe it's helpful to describe it so that our listeners can kind of recognize whether this might fit with them. And so what I found was a lot of women, in high performing women, but all women, find success. So they have goals that they kind of set out for themselves, maybe early in life or maybe in their kind of adolescence, 20s, and they work really hard to achieve those goals. And many, many women achieve those goals and they achieve success, but they never find fulfillment. And that was a problem that I saw. And then what I also saw, that kind of the kind of next step to that, was that I saw that people have patterns, they have ways of working that actually helped them to achieve what they did, right? So maybe they have those things that they thought they wanted, and they have these patterns, or like I said, me and myself included, have these patterns that help us to achieve our goals, but actually stop us from finding fulfillment. And that's kind of where those blind spots come in, right? So it's like these things have been working so well, to get to the next step, to the next goal, to the next thing I want to do, but yet I'm not finding fulfillment. And so I think that was another thing that I observed, that I was like, I want to start to tackle this, right? And then the last piece is that I think there's an opportunity, right? There's an opportunity to kind of look at those patterns and those ways of being that have kind of helped us to get to this kind of place of achievement, but actually leave us a bit fragile in the face of resilience and also block us from fulfillment. So if we can overcome those gaps, then we can kind of be well on our path to fulfillment. So I think that's what I wanted to kind of start with. It just kind of identified that this is kind of the issue that I recognized, and what I decided to kind of tackle head on, with the skills that I have, to help people to kind of find more fulfillment in their lives.
Amazing. And it's so funny because as you're talking, I'm thinking to myself, yep, yep, I definitely can see that there were things that I did in order to achieve success as a doctor and as a researcher, and how that really blocked me in other areas of my life, like maybe my relationship with my partner or with my children, or, those kinds of things. Tell me a little bit more about the patterns that you would commonly see in the women that you were working with, and then the model that you developed as a result of your observations that you found, obviously, that you have found to be helpful to identify and address those patterns.
Yeah, certainly. So I call them potholes, right? So if you think about like a pothole that maybe you're on your bike, or for me on my like electric scooter, you might be zooming along and ignoring them and getting where you want to go. And then you might hit a pothole, right? And these are the potholes that we try to deal with. And those potholes can stop you, and you can kind of decide to deal with them, or you can just get right back up and keep going. And that's what most of us do early in our lives. So usually these things don't develop in our 30s or 40s. They're usually things that came about early in life, messages that we maybe integrated, rules that we decided to live by, things that we thought kind of had to be, that have again worked, right? So I always say these things have worked and we can be grateful for them, and they worked until they don't, until they no longer serve us, and then we can let them go. So these are things like, needing to, always kind of, the things that make us quite commendable as professionals. Always try your best, always take on more than everybody else, always do everything perfect, right? So these are kind of like the kind of ways of being that are really, that can really kind of help us, but then stop us, right, from kind of, exploring fulfillment and resilience. Other things are kind of the things that might drive us. So a lot of people are, driven from their early learnings and relationships. And without getting into all the details, I use the attachment theory, as kind of in the psychological parts of my work. So the basic premise is that we learn very early in our lives, in our first relationships, from like 6 months to 2 years or so, how relationships work, and what we get from our primary caregiver. And while most of us walk around with very healthy attachment styles, we also have learnings from that teach us that we need to be a certain way to get the love and the admiration of those around us. And if we don't behave in a certain way or do certain things, that we'll lose them. And again, this is not to blame mothers any more than we already do. It's just recognizing in ourselves that we have these tendencies. And I really work with women to understand how our attachment, how our early life might have, inadvertently led us to live our lives in a certain way. And as a result, these kind of potholes, these things that we need to kind of work through, that kind of to find more fulfillment from a some psychology perspective, are things like shame-based achievement, right? So if I don't do this, then this will happen. If I don't do this, then someone will think this of me, right? So all of the shame that drives, I mean, you and me both went to medical school, right? And I'm sure you remember, Patricia, but like sometimes when I think back to like some of that training and how much shame is like used in the way that people learn, is, it's really kind of sad. And I don't think it's only in medicine, it's not to knock, but I think that a lot of our education and a lot of performance is actually shame based. It's like you want to avoid feeling like you're not enough, so then you work, 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 and it works, right? You get the results, but that's working on what I call anxious energy, right? So there's this kind of, it's not operating from a fulfilled space, it's operating from a overachieving, overdrive, anxious space, right? And this kind of energy that comes with anxiety that helps us to kind of make sure we do all the things we need to do to get where we want to get, but again, in the long run, doesn't allow us to operate from fulfilled space. So those are some examples. There's lots of them, and everyone has their own. But those are some examples of kind of potholes, kind of psychological potholes that kind of hold us back and keep us in this overdrive state where we can't relax, we can't enjoy things, we kind of can't stop. And I'm kind of moving into the second question, which is around the model, right? The model that I use. So there's what I describe is that we have these kind of three states, and they're all states of some health, right? It's not that people are kind of experiencing mental ill health when they're in these states. They're people are doing well, but they're not fulfilled, right? So the first state is this kind of overachieving overdrive state. And that's when we're on overdrive, as it says, right? So we're on go, go, go. What's the next things? Can't relax. Everything's a to-do list. Often what people tell me when they're in this state is they often can't even enjoy the achievement that they had because they're already on to the next. You know, that kind of feeling like, boom, I did that. Okay, now what's next, right? So that's a really kind of common sign that you're in this. Also, that you're kind of unable to really notice have gratitude for the achievements that you've had. Often impatience, irritability, restlessness, health things that go on are poor sleep. As you talk about, I know a lot because I really love following your show, is, your elevated cortisol levels and all the knock-on health effects with that. So that's that kind of overdrive state. And while that brings like a lot of kind of achievement, like you can kind of set goals and achieve them, it actually leaves women, men too, actually, in a state of a bit of a fragility, right? So when adversity hits, it's actually quite difficult because there's not a lot of reserve and there's not a lot of room for self-care in that time. So in that state, you're sort of trading achievement and you're using it as a bit of a proxy for the things that we need for resilience and fulfillment. So instead of nurturing our spirit, instead of nurturing our bodies, instead of doing the things that kind of might let us have a little bit of reserve for when adversity hits to be resilient, we're on overdrive and achieving, right? So it's a trade-off, right? And so again, it works until it doesn't. And often when adversity comes, there's a fragility. That's kind of part of that state. So that's the kind of overdrive state. And then the next one is resilient, which is great, but not fulfilled. So that's when you have a capacity to overcome adversity. Maybe you've had a lot of adversity in your life and you're actually feel comfortable with it, right? So you're doing okay, you are exercising a little bit about you're exercising a little bit of self-care, there's a bit of reserve, you're still achieving, right? And a lot of people could kind of stay in that state and probably, to be honest, do okay until much later in their life, where maybe they notice the knock-on later health effects of kind of staying in this go, go, go state. But there's still gaps. People that come to me in this kind of resilient but not fulfilled state often tell me things like, I thought I would be happier here, or I thought I would find a greater sense of meaning. Is this it? Like everything's going okay. It's not that anything's actually like super terrible. And sometimes people actually feel bad about complaining about being in that state, right? Because it's like they know that they have it good, but they also internally know that there's something missing. And what's missing is the kind of parts that really get you to fulfillment, which is when you really nurture your spirit. And I can talk about that in a bit, what I mean by that. But when you kind of actually attune to things like meaning, presence, being present in the here and now, when you're kind of really connected to your authentic self, to kind of what you truly believe to be you, when that inner fire and passion are there. And actually, there's a lot of benefits to getting to that last state, right? So there was the overachieving, the resilient but not fulfilled, and then the last being fulfillment. Getting to that state, that's when you have more spiritual health, and actually a lot of enhanced capacities. That's where that impact piece comes in. So when you're in a fulfilled state, actually your intuition is much better. Your capacity to integrate your left brain, right brain is a lot better. You can kind of meta process, so don't get caught in the weeds. You see those people that kind of just like, they feel like they're there but not there, right? That can kind of sort of know what's going on in a large room or a large audience, and they're not kind of caught in the weeds. Often they're kind of they can be more in a fulfilled state because there's a capacity to almost separate a little bit, and know what's kind of happening for themselves and their emotional capacity, as well as what's happening around them. And then they also enjoy things like joy, ease, clarity, all those things that we want to have, right? And one of the clues I tell people for the fulfilled state is it usually feels like flow, or if you feel like you're in the right place at the right time, doing the right thing. Like that's kind of a fulfilled feeling for those listeners that don't really even know what that means, because it's a bit of an elusive kind of term. So those are the kind of three states that I work with, and try to help people move between them, and recognize when they're slipping, what their kind of patterns are, for to tell them that they've kind of moved into the kind of less preferred state, and how they might move out.
Oh, I love everything you just said. And when you hear truth, it really you feel it inside. And as I hear you speak, I feel the truth of it inside. And and I'm curious actually for the viewer or the listener, because the reason this resonates with me is because I've actually been through all of those three states, and I'm so grateful that I am, you know, and I think, and I'm very curious actually, because when you get into like, I would love to know like, what are the steps to get from what state to the next that you would recommend? And as you say, like, how do you start to clue into the fact that you might be reverting back? Like, so it seems like it's almost like an evolution, right? So and you're right. When I was a medical doctor practicing as a specialist, and I was overachieving, and in the moment, it felt great because, as you say, you're on this like energetic high, and I didn't, and my blind spot at that time was that I didn't recognize it was like an anxious energy, as you said, which is so perfect. Like it wasn't like a relaxed and calm and flowy. And it was like I would hit the ward, I'd walk into the hospital, and I would, go onto the ward to see the patients, and like everything would ramp up, and my body would almost like tense up, and I would get ready for it. It's almost like getting ready for battle, but there's like a high to it because it's very fast paced, and you're the center of attention, and you're helping all these people, and you get the fulfillment of the help, but you almost can't even enjoy that,
Yeah.
the experience of helping people, because then you're moving on to the next thing and the next thing. And then you go home, and then it's like it becomes harder and harder, especially as you have children coming into your life, or a partner that you're incorporating or have incorporated, and you're kind of growing together through those stages, or maybe they're new in your life, and you're starting to apply, as you said, this way of being during the day to the nighttime. And and for me, to be quite frank, the way I started to self-medicate, to I was unable to find, and I'll explain what I mean by self-medicate. It wasn't with medications. um and not alcohol either, but some people do turn to that, and it's like this inability to just relax and enjoy the pleasure of life, like the simple pleasure of life. It's very hard for me to just like, yeah, to just transition from doing all the things and achieving all the things to being in the moment, as you said, and just being like, wow, this is this beautiful moment I'm having with my child. And we're having this amazing breakfast. And let me just sit here and enjoy it. And like maybe not do the dishes for a couple hours, like I just couldn't get into that kind of very relaxed state. And sometimes we'll travel. That's kind of a self medication for some people where it's like,
Mhm.
you escape from life with your vacation versus vacation is like you have a fantastic fulfilled life and then you add to it with a vacation, right? Versus like I have to get away and I have to turn. So it kind of, it's almost like from what I'm hearing you is you're the fulfilled life, that third state, you're still achieving things. You might let go of things that you no longer want to achieve, because you get a bigger, higher level of awareness of what fulfills you and what doesn't. But it may be that everything that you were doing before is absolutely what you need to do to fulfill your purpose. But the way that you do it and the mindset around it and your physiological state,
Yeah.
and as you say, your perspective and the way that you maybe switch sets, like the way that you might be achieving in your work is different from what you're doing outside of work with your relationships. Now, am I on the right track with that thinking? And if not, how would you like fine tune it, right? In terms of
Mhm.
like the way that I'm looking at this. And also, how would you describe the steps between these states, right? And recognizing when you're in the state.
Yeah, super. So I agree with you that in how you describe the overdrive state is really, really common. And, it's important to note that there are many people that um, live a busy life and still are fulfilled, right? And it's important to note that you might have busy times in your life, or you might maybe you need to be on the ward, and you are, and you just need to be in this busy on call phase in this case, or whatever it is that one does for a living. Um, and so it's not that you have to erase busyness, right? So my program, or the way that I approach this, is for the everyday person that wants to continue to live in this society. We're not talking about people that want to kind of leave their life and go like be a monk or join an ashram. I think that that's a good way to get fulfillment, but I'm trying to bring it into everyday life. So it's not that you have to erase being busy by any means, but as you kind of suggested, a couple things. One is you might counterbalance it with, when you might sort of have to be in overdrive for periods of time, but then that you recognize it, you see it, and then you might counterbalance it. The second thing is you don't get into this kind of pattern or this habit of staying in this overdrive all the time, which is kind of what you described, that you have to take it to everywhere you go. And that, I think, is that this is why I call them kind of an overdrive kind of state. So for hours at a time, sure, it's fine to be busy and doing things, and even a day at a time. But if that's your everyday, if all the time you live like that, that's now become a pattern. And usually people that are in that state for long periods of time, that kind of start to see some of the sort of negative knock-on health benefits, or health disadvantages, sorry. They also describe like actually a bit of like intolerance, or for some people a fear of being still, right? It's actually quite uncomfortable to be still if you're used to being busy, busy, busy all the time. And often that can be driven a little bit by one's kind of wish to kind of avoid emotions, right? So that kind of speaks to some of one of the things you kind of talked about is how do you move between the states, right? So how do you kind of, if you're stuck in overdrive, or you find you want to kind of move into another state, one of the ways that I work with people is to kind of sort of start to understand their state, right? So to be able to check in with themselves, know where they are, and then work on finding their way out. And so one of the things that I describe for people is to kind of do these kind of check-ins to see like what state are they in. And it's not that you're in this state all the time. So, if I'm talking about me, I probably live between resilience and fulfillment most of the time. I'm not always in fulfillment by any means. And I can slip down to overdrive. And I've learned over time what my triggers are and what are the signs for me that I've kind of moved into overdrive, right? So that's what I talk about, kind of this check-in. So, and the check-in takes like moments, right? So I usually tell people to do it like, maybe on their little like bathroom break if they're at work, or while they're filling their water bottle, because it's that short, right? It's so small. And so what we want to do is kind of check in with our bodies. Our bodies give us a lot of information about what our feelings are, what we're kind of experiencing, right? So that restlessness can kind of that the restlessness is often felt in our bodies. Often people describe it maybe in their belly, sometimes in their chest, some difficulty with taking very deep breaths, right? Sometimes people feel tension in their jaws, lots of headaches, tension in their hands. Those are all like signs of kind of some emotional processes going on within ourselves. And usually for a lot of people that aren't that comfortable with their emotions, they might use activity to kind of not have to deal with that, right? That's really common. So that's a common kind of blind spot that gets one stuck in overdrive. Anger being a really common emotion that we sort of try to push away, and then we kind of take it out by just being busy and taking on more, etc. So we scan our bodies. What's going on? What's our subjective feeling? Are we feeling restless? Are we feeling calm? Are we feeling relaxed? Are we feeling like on edge? Are we feeling irritable, right? So, if you're more on the irritable, restless, impatient side of things, maybe you're more in this kind of overdrive state. And if you're kind of more calm and kind of feeling more like chilled out, relaxed, then maybe you're not quite in you're out of that state potentially. So we start with kind of those, what's going on with my body? What's my subjective experience? Okay. And then I ask people to kind of check in with their thoughts, right? So this is just in seconds. Like, what am I feeling? Boom. Okay. Yeah. My jaw's tight. Boom. Next stop. Right. So I'm not talking about hours of this. And then thoughts. So things like, what's the quality of my thoughts? So like, and the quantity of my thoughts. So the quality meaning like, what kind of thoughts am I having? Are they all about like what I need to do next? Are they all about like planning and being in the future and what my next thing to do is? Because that's usually a sign of this anxious energy, right? Because anxiety is moving ourselves into the future and predicting it, right? And usually for high performing people, when we predict the future negatively, which is anxiety, what we do is we over prepare. So we think about, we need to do this and this and this and this and this, and that's an antidote to our anxiety, right? So if we're in that state, we're probably in overdrive, right? Because we're kind of in the quality of our thoughts is all about the future. Conversely, when we're more fulfilled, our thoughts might be more in the present. Wow, this is a nice cup of coffee. Or isn't this a nice interaction that Patricia and I are having, right? So, it doesn't have to
I was
be
just
like,
thinking that. I was like, you could be sitting here and I could be sitting here. And there was a moment where it's like, I'm tense. I'm like, in my mind, I'm like, okay, I want to make sure I ask the right questions and I want to keep this conversation like, whatever, it's my job to keep it flowing, whatever. And as you were talking about, I was like, okay, yeah, my jaw's a little bit tense and my shoulder's a little bit tense. So let me relax that. Let me relax this. And let me just enjoy the fact that here we are together having this super awesome conversation. And then you said that, and I was like,
I am a psychiatrist. So that
yes,
happens like that.
I love it.
Yeah, exactly. Right. So you can just enjoy being here, right? And kind of have faith that things are going to go where they need to go. Right. And
Absolutely.
there's a confidence that comes out of that, right? Sort of being in the present, right? So what is the quality of my thoughts, and also the quantity? If my thoughts are running a mile a minute, that's often more consistent with the overdrive state, versus when my thoughts are kind of more slow and there's pace between them and there's not a need to be thinking every minute, right? So those are kind of some clues about that. And then the other thing I talk to people about is thinking about maybe like the behaviors that come out of that, or the outcomes of that, manifestations of those feelings and thoughts. So behaviors. So what am I kind of doing, right? Am I always kind of doing, or am I able to be, right? So this do be trade-off, right? Doing versus just being. And also, what's the quality of my relationships, right? So because all of those impact. So for me personally, when I'm kind of getting into overdrive state, then all of these like triggers of how I have to do everything right and everything has to be done properly and all this stuff comes out. And then that impacts my relationship, right? Because then now my husband all of a sudden has to do everything perfectly, right? So this is if that's a sign for me. If I'm starting to kind of project my own kind of overdrive onto another person, then that's a sign also for me. So it's kind of a check-in, like what are the quality of these components, and then I know where I am, and then I look at finding my way out.
I love that so much, and I love that you mentioned that it's not even so it includes us having these patterns ourselves, but it's also you start to expect it from the people around you, and then you start to like, yeah, as you say, project on them, and then when they are like, my husband is this wonderful man, and he has this incredible ability to just be in the moment, to relax, to enjoy. He's the guy who will like, we'll do breakfast and then he won't clean the dishes because he's playing with the kids. And he, if I'm in my overdrive state, I'm thinking, okay, like, we want to clean the dishes so we can move on to the next thing. We said we are going to do a hike and whatever. And the more that I get into my fulfilled state, I notice that I'm just like flowing with it. I'm like, oh, isn't this fun? We're having fun as a family and let's relax and whatever. And you know what? We could even go for a hike and come back to a messy kitchen and we'll all work together to clean it up. And I'll just have faith that everything is going to work out and that it becomes all the activities are the same, right? Like we had breakfast, we went for a walk, we did dishes. However, the energy and the experience and the relationship, everything about that changes in such a positive way. And I think this is so powerful, especially in today's modern culture where women are and men are trying so hard, and we want to achieve, we want to make an impact. However, in order to make an impact on the world and survive and thrive and actually enjoy the life that we're here, we have to really pay attention to this. So, Sabina, how then would you move from a state of overachievement? Like, what would be the steps? Like, if I'm thinking of like a journey, and I'm like, I now recognize where I am on the map. I'm like, okay, I'm in overdrive. I'm in overachievement. What would be the next few steps I need to take, or many steps, or like, what does that journey look like to get eventually to the state of fulfillment? Because the resilience part is interesting for sure. When I burned out working as a doctor on the ward, spinal cord injury ward, I had so little resilience that I quit my job. Like that was,
Mhm.
I was in extreme fragility. Like I just, and I was in a different state than the doctors I was working with. Like certain changes came about, everyone else adapted, and I just like couldn't. I thought there was something terribly wrong with me. Now I recognize I just didn't have these tools that you're teaching us.
Mhm.
And I wish that I had done the work as I was in the state of overachievement so that I could build the resilience, so that I at least maybe could have continued to work in some capacity or make the decision to leave, but not in a state of like flight.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
fight, I like fight and then flight, that kind of thing. More in a state of like, this no longer serves me. I feel like I'm ready for something new, like that kind of difference. Again,
Yeah.
the outcome's the same, but the energy is different. So what would
Totally.
be the steps, like talking to the person I was before, right?
Yeah.
How would you like paint that out for me, or draw that out?
Yeah. Good question. First of all, I'm sorry that that was such I mean, I just I felt the anyways, I had lots of kind of, just imaginations about how hard that would be. So anyways, thank you for sharing it because it's a really hard, place to be, and often it's comes from like it's for you, like came from a place of really trying your best and wanting to be the best you can, right? So it's none of this is done because people don't sort of want the best for themselves or don't work hard or there's no I guess it's to say like to take away all the weakness and shame that comes from those experiences. I think is really important. And as a kind of addition to answer your question, the first step to me always is to just so as we talked about checking in, name your state, I usually say, and then accept your state, right? That it's okay. It's okay that I'm here. I'm not a bad person. I'm not weak. There's nothing that this doesn't say anything bad about me. It's just where I am right now. and that's it, right? So that's, I think, and it sounds so simple, but it's super important because it calms that cortisol storm, is what I say, right? So it calms, as you talked about, that fight or flight comes from being in this kind of sympathetic drive, or being in this state of like go, go, go. Then when we're kind of wired in a particular way to make those decisions that make a lot of sense, because in our historic days we had to do that when we were in that place, when we were operating on anxiety. We had to choose quickly what we had to do. So accepting where we are helps us to calm that down as a first step, right? We want to get into a place where our parasympathetic system can help us to figure out what we want to do next, right? So acceptance, and then gracefully find your way out is what I usually say. Right. And and the grace comes from having a bit of gratitude for that person, right? For how great you were and how what you were trying and all the good things you were trying to do, and then thinking about, what do I want to do next? Okay. And so that's the first piece. Then if you already have done some work about your kind of knowing your potholes or your triggers, you can start to look at what might be driving this. Like, what is it that is keeping me in this place? Or what is it that's, making this change at work, as you described, so difficult for me? Right. So, again, it's not from a place of shame, because you've already accepted that you're here. You already have thanked yourself for all you've done to get here. And now let's look kind of like from a very nurturing place. What is it that's kind of maybe feeding this fight or flight state? What's making me feel like I need to run? And so we can get into it now if you want, or I can kind of give you what others sometimes tell me, whatever's better for you, Patricia.
Yeah, I think to be honest, like I think for the purpose of time, what I would love is the steps that people need to take to move between the states, because I feel like, yeah, the being able to recognize what one's own kind of contributions to the state, like, it requires some guidance
Yeah.
possibly to,
Yeah.
because it is such a blind spot for people. Like, and I know I needed that help.
Yeah.
And so that might be helpful. But yeah, if there's anything like you
Yeah.
can do,
So
and
once you kind of have a sense of that, that's one avenue. So, and this is where I bring in this kind of, it's a combination of the mind. So that's those potholes that we were just talking about, that, as you said, often people need some help from, and then the spirit, right? So it's the mind and looking at those potholes and how do we work through them. And then second is, really important, is bringing in what I describe as spirit nurturing practices, right? So this is why Radiate uses it uses evidence-based mental health as well as spirit nurturing practices, which are also evidence-based, as an intentional blend to help people find fulfillment. And what I mean by spirit nurturing is kind of anything that feeds your spirit. And so for some people, that's kind of obvious. Some people maybe were raised in a way that spirituality is a big part of them, but for many people, they weren't raised that way, and that's totally fine. I think anyone can have a way of feeding this kind of inner authentic fire inside them that helps them to be able to combat adversity and find fulfillment. So that's how I describe the spirit. It's kind of this part of yourself that kind of is your inner candle, your inner fire, and this kind of gut, if you will, gut, not your gut in medical terms, but this kind of that kind of instinct. That's part of our spirit, and we need to nurture it and feed it. Even if we're not exercising, even if we're not part of a religious organization or anything like that, feeding it can be anything that helps us to make that spirit feel better. Usually what I tell people is that are kind of really new to this, especially, is anything that slows you down into the present moment can be really helpful. And anything that takes you out of yourself, right? So the kind of spirituality in the way that Radiate thinks of it is just an acknowledgement that there's something outside of me. Whatever that is for people is totally individual. For some people, it's energy. For some people, it's the universe. For some people, it's God. For some people, it's nature, which I think is a really handy opportunity that's very universal. So one of the first practices I recommend to people if they're new to kind of anything spiritual is our nature observations. I love nature observations. So they're just like it's crazy the impact. Like I can do a 20-minute meditation or a 2-minute nature observation, and sometimes I feel exactly the same after either.
Totally. No, I
Um,
I tell people, like, it's like when you look at flowers, obviously anything in nature, but I think people can really relate to the flowers. You look at the perfection and the play of colors and the symmetry and like the unique shapes and how the shapes like repeat themselves through nature. Like I saw flowers that look like dragonflies and orchids look like the female organs and just this super beautiful and I think to myself and I used to just look. Now I look and think to myself, this is the creation of the energy of the universe. And therefore, in my mind, now the energy of the universe must be good. Like it
mm,
must be beautiful. It must be like order in the chaos, right? Because it is producing this just gorgeous array of nature. So when you say nature observations to me, that might sound very like like very light to some people listening to this for the first time. And what I have to tell you, the viewer, the listener, is that it is like if you approach it with the right mindset, it is the most powerful thing you can do, I
yeah,
think.
it's incredible. And,
Yeah.
like, for some people, maybe that's, like, too far to get all the way to what it means, but it certainly can get there, and I love it. I love that you do that because I do too, it's just like, and it's something that I noticed I used to do even as a kid before I even really thought about this. I remember being in awe, right? So for some people, thinking about what used to kind of bring them into this place of being in the moment and noticing things outside themselves that as a child can be a really good clue of what really high yield spirit nurturing practice might be for them. But the very simple ones, if you kind of don't know like how you want to start at all, is like just to look at anything in nature. But the key is that there's nothing you need to do about it. So the observation part is the nature is important, and then the observation part is super important because you're just observing. You're just watching and noticing. And as you said, you notice the shape, you notice the colors, you notice kind of maybe I actually really like looking at leaves blowing in the wind because it's just like, and it's soothing, but you're just noticing. And that's actually a really good practice that's actually an antidote to anxiety, because anxiety is all about being in the future and doing something and preparing or avoiding. And when you're in this present moment, you're actually training your brain a little bit on how to stay in the present, right? So there's twofold. One is you kind of get this calm. Two, or more than twofold. You're connected to something outside of you. You're nurturing your spirit, but you're also kind of secretly combating your anxiety too. So that's all very good. So these spirit nurturing practices can start. So we talked a lot about nature observations, but they can be meditations, guided meditations, but also things like the arts are really helpful for people. So music, fine arts, dancing, cooking, like all kinds of things people can use to kind of feed their spirit. And I really work with people to try to find a customized practice that fits with their lifestyle and fits with their own kind of what nurtures their own spirit, so that they have a bit of a roadmap to kind of move through. So that's one really important part. And then things like self-care, which is high yield self-care, I usually say, because no one has time to do all the self-care activities that we could all ever do, right? Especially nowadays where it feels sometimes like sometimes self-care is like code word for do more for some people, right? um
I
and
don't know what you're talking about.
it's like it's not us, it's you, kind of thing, especially in organizations that happens a lot, I find. So but high yield self-care, so knowing for yourself, like what is it that kind of helps you to calm your cortisol storm, like what is it that you need that helps you specifically. So for me, if I'm in overdrive, I need to do a guided meditation. I cannot do like a meditation that's on my own because my mind is just like doing X, Y, and Z. I need to kind of do some I need to do exercise, or I have to kind of burn a little bit of the anxiety off, right? So it doesn't have to be super intense exercise, but it has to be something that helps to burn it off to kind of calm my cortisol storm a little bit. I personally use like my children to give me oxytocin, to like boost my oxytocin with lots of hugs and stuff. So this just calms me down so that I can gracefully find my way out. So, but I do try to help people to find what are their high yield activities, self-care activities. Usually they're within the kind of common acronym that I use, NESTs, right? So nutrition, exercise, sleep, time for stillness and support, right? So it's within those five, as many as we can do, but trying to find the ones that you really can make time for, or that really work for you, so that when you're in that time of overdrive, you're not feeling like, oh, I'm wasting my time, I'm not doing anything. Because that's the time when you really need to know that what you're going to do is going to be helpful. So that we talked about the self-care, we talked about spirit nurturing, and then the other parts that are really important are things that are sometimes people need help with, and that was what the Radiate program focuses on, which is around knowing your emotions, right? So understanding your emotions, being able to process them, because they can often kind of lead us to overdrive. Understanding these potholes for ourselves, including attachments, and how those impact our relationships, because relationships, not that people don't have, sometimes people have really great relationships, but they don't know how to use them, right? They don't know how to access support from the people that love them. And then sometimes people need to figure out who in their circle are like their people for various things, right? Because sometimes we knock on the wrong doors, and it's not that the doors we knock on, the people don't want to help us, but maybe they're just not equipped, right? So understanding our kind of support circle and who we can go to, it's one of the chief, really, like, huge evidence around resilience. There's a lot of evidence around supports and how we kind of, and community, in terms of building resilience. So those are the areas that I usually would get people to focus on, if they're kind of in overdrive and wanting to get towards fulfillment.
I think it's amazing. And I recognize how, and it doesn't take long, as you say, like sometimes you only have 2 minutes to walk away from your desk, look out through the window and see nature, right? And those 2 minutes can actually be like enough in that moment. So thinking that you have to dedicate all this time in your busy life towards these steps. And the reality too is that I think we deep down inside, we know that if we take a portion of our busy time and dedicate it towards these practices, that other time we're more effective. So you end up, actioning less, but and achieving more. So, if you're listening to this and this feels like truth to you, then definitely start bringing those things in. And I also recognize that for every person is different, and there's different stages. Like when I was first going through this process, I only had time for like 5 minutes of sitting in stillness. Now I have so much resilience, and I'm in the state of like, I'm learning fulfillment. And it just makes me feel so good when I sit down and I sit in stillness, that I've made 20 minutes a day. Like and it's cherished, sacred time for me.
Mhm.
So like, I will protect it. It's rare that I don't give myself that time. And the other thing too, is that one of, I think, the common things with overachieving people, who have had like things in their lives that has set them up to have blind spots, is that we tend to suppress certain emotions, as you say, like negative emotions, like suppressing fear and not recognizing that it's anxiety that's driving. So a lot of us are just like blindly achieving, not realizing that there even is anxiety and anxiousness there. And the problem is that you start to suppress the positive emotions too. So part of my journey over the last like year has actually been to purposefully like bring up from deep inside of myself the emotions that are appropriate to what I'm doing in a positive way. So for example, allowing myself to feel just pure joy in a moment of like having a bath, like a magnesium salt bath, let's say, right there. Before I'd be like, okay, now's my self-care time, like let me make the bath and let me sit here, oh that feels nice, okay, now the time is up and now I'm get out. Now it's like check. As you said, it's like my to-do list.
Yeah.
And now I find myself, now that I'm more in the fulfilled state, is like, just luxuriating in it, like finding the sensuality of it, not the sexuality, but the sensuousness and the pure, healthy pleasure of it. And it's just like, like you said, like now when I have a cup of coffee, like allowing myself 3 minutes to just go, oh, this just tastes so good. And isn't this a lovely moment? So it's like you're introducing this, joyful states, or states of like, healthy pleasures and contentment and fulfillment through your day. And it just amazing how it will start to radiate
Yeah.
into all the other areas of your life, including your relationships. So, there was a time when I was like, what do I do to heal my relationship? And I realized like, I have to heal myself.
Yeah.
Like actually, I'm projecting all these things like my partner, I need this from him and I need that from him. I need this to happen. And actually what I really needed, and sure, there are things that we work on together as like how we relate to each other and communicate with each other. The foundational thing though was really healing myself, and not healing from a nutritional eating perspective. Like I was doing all those things. As you said, it's like you can be doing all the things and have a perfectly healthy body and have a perfectly successful career. And, you're doing all the things and you reach this state and you're just like, I'm just not happy.
Yeah.
Like, I am not as happy as I thought I would be. There are happy moments and there is happiness, but I'm not like, I thought it would be like amazing,
Yeah.
like just like,
Yeah, yeah. Like,
wow.
"This is it?" That's what I get a lot of, like, "This is it? This is what I worked so hard for?" Like, "What?" Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So it's like the evolution, right? It's evolving. So it's like evolving from overachieving to having resilience within that achievement, and then evolving to be fulfilled, to feel fulfilled, to live in fulfillment,
Mhm.
so that you can have the impact. Like, you and myself and many other very ambitious individuals out there who want to make this world a better place. It does the world no service if you're showing up, achieving all the things, and you are just like a dried up husk inside.
Yeah. And I think, just to add that the other piece that is worth mentioning is that when you are in the fulfilled state more often, again, it's not that you stay there all the time, but you get more of it, right? That's the goal. Um, when you're in the fulfilled state more often, your capacities are actually improved. So as you said, you're more efficient. You drop things that maybe don't, that kind of anxious time that you spend like scrolling and doing things that maybe aren't really serving you go, but also your capacities are enhanced. So people are better lead women. Like I work with women that want to be, that find that they're not getting to that next level that they want to get to. And then once they integrate a little bit more fulfillment into their life, they lead better because their relational capacities are improved, because their emotional intelligence is improved, because their intuition is improved, their complex problem solving. So you also have a greater impact, right? So it's twofold. You feel better. You feel better, right? So that's the kind of subjective. You have the improved health benefits, and also you have a greater impact. So it feels like an investment of time, but actually, as you said, at the end of the day, there's a lot of gain that comes from that investment, and actually you end up with a little bit more time to kind of enjoy, and just the small things in life, right? That we've worked so hard to get.
Oh yeah, and when you hit that state, it's like it's almost magical, because you're like, how am I accomplishing all these things? And yet I'm working like a half day and then I get a nice lunch and then I get to go out and do my walk and my hike and then I get my kids and like I used to work like 9 to 5 and come home totally burnt out and achieving like X amount. And now I work, 9 to 1 and I'm achieving more within that time, and there's like a creative feel to it, a
Mhm.
flow state to it. Yes, there are days where I'm at the end of that, I'm just like, oh my goodness, I need to really put in some counterbalancing measures. And I love
Mm,
that you said that. It's like sometimes I'm having to do massive counterbalancing depending what state I'm in terms of my business and activities. Um, and then and sometimes, like, because I've become, as you say, really good at checking in with myself, like the tension in my back and like, all those things, it's like I will cancel things now. I'll be like,
mhm.
I scheduled this into my schedule when I was at this state. And now I feel like now I recognize that kind of the counterbalancing measures that I'm gonna gracefully say no, right? I'm gonna set a few
Yeah,
healthy boundaries and that kind of stuff. So, and it's all done with kindness,
yeah.
right? And so life and I'm so grateful for you being here in this space, Sabina, because I work with a lot of women, obviously, with my health promotion programs, and what I see is that I can get them to a certain state, right, of like amazing health, like their best health, and for some of them that's enough. For many of them there's that additional piece, that piece of fulfillment.
Mhm.
It's like that higher level state, right? Which sometimes you have to get your health in order, like, you have to really like figure out your health, get that sleep, get that healthy
Yeah.
nutrition, set the foundation, right? Figure out what works for you. so that you have the energy to continue to do the work. But some people actually, it's the reverse. They'll go into the mind body, like the mind part of the mind body connection first, and
Yeah.
then they get their mind sorted out, and then they have the capacity to work on their body. So depending on where you, like, what's the entry point? Like all roads lead to Rome. Rome, the end destination is a
Yeah.
super healthy mind body connection, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Everything.
Mind, body, spirit, soul, all that. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
And there was a time when if someone said spirit to me, I'd like, whoa, and now I'm like full in, right? So for
Yeah.
if you're the person who is like, whoa, just so you know, yeah, it could be it's like the energy that you see, it's in the universe. Like whatever energy is driving the universe is causing the planets to spin, is causing the plants to grow, for evolution to occur. You can think of it as that. And that energy is inside of you, and you limit and you block that energy. You basically put barriers up to that energy, like flowing freely in your tissues,
Mm.
and through you, and nurturing the thoughts in your mind and creating positive versus negative ones, like however you want to think of it, right? And the truth is that we all have that capacity within us to have that energy be just completely vibrant and full and expansive, and flowing with the seasons. As you say, there will be seasons in our life where there is a bit more achievement with a bit of sacrifice on fulfillment. Hopefully there will always be resilience, but that has to be intentional. Like you will not just naturally be resilient in today's
Yeah.
modern age.
Yeah.
You must do the work to find out what for you brings joy and pleasure and being in the moment, and relaxing, being able to relax and be calm, so that you can counterbalance life, like the reality of life, right? You have to develop a healthy relationship with reality.
Yeah. And I think for some people, it's exceptionally difficult to just learn how to relax or learn how to find joy. And that's why I think these practices, just integrating them into your life, just that you're doing them like a prescription, can be really helpful, because it's really hard in our modern world to turn it down. And as I said, it's uncomfortable when you've been in this place for a long time. It's actually really hard. It's exceptionally difficult to slow down. And I get why people just keep on, keep on. But the thing is, at some point, it can lead to not so good outcomes. And even if it doesn't, there's such a missed opportunity to the joy and clarity and ease, and the enhanced capacities and health outcomes that one can get from fulfillment. So, either the opportunity cost or the fear of what happens if you don't. Either either way,
Right.
I think it's super important. And I agree with you that it is the connection of the kind of the mind and spirit and the body. And I know you work with the mind as well as completely, and you work with all facets too, but the combination of those two is a deadly combination, right? It's actually the what we need kind of to have this kind of more full holistic life.
Yeah, and I remember when we were talking, at the beginning, like when we first met, you mentioned that your superpower was to, correct me if I'm wrong, is to, when you're having, like when you're sitting in this program that you have with women, and it's a small group setting, your superpower is leading the conversation in a way that you help these women identify their blind spots in a way that they probably would have had a really hard time, or taken a really long time, or maybe never had success with,
Yeah.
without that expertise to identify their blind spots. Which is that, like, am I correct?
Yeah, yeah, exactly. I think, especially for women that are doing fine, right? That aren't coming because they're in a crisis, that are coming because they want to grow to the next stage. It's really difficult to find what those blind spots are, to figure out what's holding one back. It's really challenging, especially if the world really rewards us for overachieving, and right, that there's a lot of external praise that comes from that. So to kind of take a step back and figure out what's driving it is exceptionally difficult. So I do that kind of. I work individually, but I also work in groups. And as I told you, I feel like one of my superpowers is this working in groups, because group facilitation is just like, I love it. It's my jam. And I find that in that space, women can figure out, because you bring to these groups what you bring to the world. And so we can see it, right, together in a collaborative, safe fashion, what's going on, right? What is it that you're bringing? So, the way that one might react when there's a difference of opinion in the group. Some of us have roles we take on. Some of us are very sociable and always want everyone to feel okay, and therefore try to avoid conflict at the cost of ourselves, at the cost of kind of what we really believe. That'd just be one example of a blind spot. So
Mhm.
there's many blind spots that come out in the group that people can't, it's hard for people to figure out in their everyday interactions or with the people that they're interacting with all the time because they're in their own patterns. But in a group, we have the capacity together to try to unearth those blind spots. And the sort of the group is kind of greater than the sum of its parts for a lot of people, right? So everyone gains, but the group as a whole is just so powerful. And that's what I love about the groups that we run for Radiate, because everyone gains and contributes to each other, but they unearth things that they maybe wouldn't have found in any other way, in other formats.
Yeah, even sometimes more than one-on-one, right? Because sometimes someone makes a comment that triggers an insight in another person that they wouldn't even have thought, or a question that someone asks, and other people are like, "Whoa, I never even thought of that question, but it's so relevant."
Yeah.
Right? So, and the discussion that comes out of that ends up being just what they need. That's like they didn't even know they needed it, right?
Yeah.
And having a group setting, I'm a big believer in the power of group. And I get way better results. Not to say you don't get good results one-on-one, and for specific situations, obviously it's necessary. However, for most people going through some kind of group experience, whether it's a health program or mental health or whatever, there is this like unexplainable, as you say, the sum is bigger than its parts,
Yeah.
right? And so until you participate in that, it depends on the person leading it. So then it becomes very, very important that you're with the right leader.
Yeah.
So that's very important. So for people who have been really connecting with you, Sabina, and they want to work with you, how can they find you? What does it look like to join? Radiate.
Yeah, so thanks, Patricia. So I would love to work with anyone that wants to learn more. And it starts off really gentle. You can just have a kind of connect call with me and sort of describe what you're looking for and kind of if Radiate's the right place for you, etc. But as you have up here, like on Linktree, I have kind of an outline of some of my programs. But generally, the way it works, you connect with me on a short call, and then we do a roadmap session. So that's kind of more intensive. That's a one-to-one where we talk about we figure out together collaboratively what are the potholes, what are the things that have continued to kind of keep you in the unpreferred state, right? So what are the things that are kind of keeping this alive? And then we look at two important things. One are your high yield self-care activities, and what are your high yield spirit nurturing practices. And then we build a map, right? We build a roadmap for how you're going to get to kind of a more fulfilled state. And that's important because, and that'll be written, that's important because then far after you're done working with me, you still have that, because we know that life will continue to offer its challenges. And so you might want to refer back to that and how you might kind of pull yourself out of states in the future. So you'll have that. And from there, you move on to a group program or an individual program, depending on your preference and what your needs are. And those group programs are kind of composed of a number of participants that might be in a similar state to you. And then we work through on a weekly basis, kind of various topics, some of which I explained today, and some extras. And we work through kind of on a week by week basis, depending on the right group for you. The groups can span from 5 weeks to 9 weeks, kind of on a weekly basis. And then we'll have a closing up session as well. And then as part of that, you become part of the Radiate community. So we continue to kind of support each other through various means, because after you've been through this journey, you want to kind of have your people that know the language and know how to help support you, even when you're not working directly with me. So that's kind of how the program works. And as you can see, there's my Linktree, or you can just find me on LinkedIn, Dr. Sabina Nagpal. It's super simple. Send me a note, and I would love to connect with you.
Amazing. And I have the links. I'll put the links in the show notes. And again, if you're on LinkedIn, it's Dr. Sabina Nagpal, Nagpal, for those who are listening, Sabina. And just to finish off, Sabina, what would, in your opinion, this is just kind of like there's no right or wrong answer to this, but to you, what does it mean to live a wise life, to live wisely?
Oh, good question. I think that it means that there's a capacity for gratitude in one's life, for one, and there's a capacity to feel like you have some clarity around what your kind of purpose and meaning is and what direction you want to take. And that doesn't mean you have to know exactly where you're going, but you feel like what you're doing in the moment is the right thing for you. And that you have some confidence that the next steps will also be the right steps. And when you have that, you also have joy and clarity and ease, and kind of a capacity to really connect with yourself and others. That's what I think is kind of a wise life.
Thank you so much, Dr. Sabina Nagpal. It's been such a pleasure having you here today. And thank you, everyone, for joining us today. If you're listening or watching, feel free to save, subscribe, and share, because sharing is caring. Hope you have a wonderful rest of your day, evening, or night, and we'll see you soon. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.